This is Who's Behind the News from newsjunkie.net. I am Matt Fidler. Today we're talking with senior writer for News Junkie, Morgan Kriesel. Morgan's been writing articles about the purge of government scientists and data collectors and the undermining of government agencies that support this kind of work. While these workers aren't taking the cuts setting down, there seems to be a disconnect between these various agencies and the value of their work to the American public. So this is where News Junkie is taking an initiative.
News Junkie really wants to be a part of bringing them all together into kind of a cohesive, independent science apparatus to kind of make sure that we can continue all of the work, the research, the data that we've been doing away from political interference.
Morgan Kriesel, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
It's great to talk to you because I think a lot of the time when we think about government agencies, we think about bureaucracies, and I think a lot of us don't understand what those bureaucracies actually do. But they compile a lot of data that can be actually really useful. Can you talk a little bit about that data and the importance of these data gathering projects?
Data and information and knowledge, having an educated public is, what democracy lies on. And being informed about, especially, I'm thinking of things like public health, knowing what kind of illnesses are spreading, what kind of illnesses affect people, especially things like chronic illnesses, disease caused by exposures to chemicals. We need to know that that's an issue in order to address it. And it's the same with the effects of climate change, which is things that NOAA and FEMA measure and address. And you need to be able to measure that data, and scientists need to be able to observe that data to have it be accessible and reliable in order to make policy that addresses those issues.
So yeah, the government agencies like NOAA are tracking weather patterns, and FEMA then is responding to disasters. I'd love to be able to go into the whys of this, but are there any whats? Like, are we seeing any direct results of the cuts to these agencies that do pretty important things in a time of climate change?
The thing is, we're not going to know how it affects people on a day-to-day level if we're not collecting the data. So things like the USDA stopped doing the food security survey, and we also had everything happen with SNAP benefits during the government shutdown. It was briefly suspended, but if we're not measuring for how that affects people, we're not going to know. So people will be affected, but we won't have anything to point to say like X amount of people are now experiencing more food insecurity. They will be, but they'll be invisible.
What's interesting also are the effects of the people who are doing this work. We've talked about a lot of people losing jobs or just maybe losing budgets to do their job properly. What are these scientists and data collectors doing? Let's start with some place like I think that's been a little bit more public is alt national parks, right? The people who've been working for the national park system, which is still a very popular system. I've heard about environmental scientists cleaning toilets at Yosemite and things like that. Are there other systems that are or other organizations that are happening such as that and other bureaucracies around the federal government?
Yeah, there's a ton. Every department pretty much that I've looked into has had sometimes fired federal employees, sometimes people put on leave, and sometimes it's people who still have their jobs but feel like their work is they're not being allowed to do the work at the level that they want to. So a ton of organizations are springing up around each of these, like the national parks, the CDC. FEMA has one. There's so many. Every day I look into it, I find like five more.
Well, I want to know, what are these organizations like alt national parks doing? Are they continuing to do the work that were originally slotted to do? Are they protesting? Are they, doing campaign like educational public outreach campaigns? Yeah.
Yeah, all of the above. There's like a whole bunch of different levels. So I mean, there's stuff like alt national parks, which is a little bit more organized. There's also the resistance rangers. So there's the more like loose and newer organizations that are more about advocacy, kind of posting statistics about like this is what the national parks does. This is why we have all this staff. Like this is how many millions of dollars the parks bring in per year, and kind of spreading the word over social media mostly. And then there's like a level above that that's more about organizing, like the National Public Health Coalition, which is former CDC workers. They started out as just like hey, they started out as a different organization called Fired But Fighting, and it was like, hey, all of us have been laid off. Here's a bunch of resources for fired federal workers. Here's how you can get in contact with a lawyer. Here's how you can like access food benefits, stuff like that, and then became more of an advocacy group. Now they're appearing at rallies and they're like making rounds in the press, and they've written a letter asking for RFK's resignation. And they're also collecting data. So then you have like the next level above that is people who are trying to continue their work in some capacity or collect data or add to academic and scientific research. So the CDC Data Project, which is run by the National Public Health Coalition, is collecting data on all of the cuts to the CDC, the budgetary cuts, how that will impact the state's economies. You can select it by state and everything, and they're keeping track of which branches have been impacted by reductions in forces. And then you have stuff like climate.us, which is former NOAA people who are trying to bring back everything that was on climate.gov, which was a NOAA website, which had all of these resources that could help educators explain climate change and the effects on climate change, and has been taken down. So they're trying to rebuild everything that they had been working on before. So yeah, there's a ton of range of things that are happening. Yeah, there's just so much. There's like so much energy and so many things moving in this space. It's really exciting.
Well, so you mentioned climate.us, right? Which was, so that's the same or similar kind of data and information that was on climate.gov as before?
Yeah, so their mission is to recreate everything that was on climate.gov. There's a similar project called Restored CDC or CDC Restored, which is attempting to like bring back all of the archived web pages that were on cdc.gov. Um, so yeah, those are similar projects. Climate.us is not up yet. I think they're fundraising right now, but yeah, so they're trying to recreate all of those resources.
You mentioned archival of climate.gov. Is this from archive.org, the Internet Archive site?
So that was Restored CDC. They are doing it off of like the CDC archives. But
So those aren't gone completely.
no, they're not gone completely. And they're also, I think, have access to it. Um, yeah, I was trying to confirm if Restored CDC was former CDC people. They're not as transparent as the National Public Health Coalition, which makes it very clear that they're former CDC, but they're like they say they're public health experts and then like coders and stuff. So I don't know exactly how they're getting the archive, but they're I think just getting it mostly from CDC.
Now, one thing that I've heard is that you were trying to compile these agencies, so for some kind of crosstalk between these agencies and kind of, I don't know, resistance groups, you might call them.
Hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so because there's so much happening and everything is kind of bubbling up, um, all these independent movements and, the different levels of how involved they are, how much work they're trying to do. Um, yeah, it's it's just that there's so many and there's so much energy, and News Junkie really wants to be a part of bringing them all together into kind of a cohesive independent science apparatus to kind of make sure that we can continue all of the work, the research, the data that we've been doing away from political interference to kind of build back up our institutions, but in a way that is more sustainable even than we had 10 years ago. When I was interviewing Erin Melton Bacchus, who is part of the National Public Health Coalition, she co-founded it. She was talking about how political interference has always been a part of the job at CDC, even under Obama, and she worked under the Biden administration during COVID, and they would have to toe the line sometimes. She worked in communication, so she would have to edit what she was saying based on what these political appointees wanted from her. So I think having the chance to bring these people together to build back up our institutions in a way that can protect them from not only something as crazy as this happening again, but from the problems that have plagued government research since the beginning.
And, from doing this research and being really close to the subject for the last, almost a year now, what do you think can happen to regain trust in agencies and the really good work that, government bureaucracies or not, I mean, valuable work, right? Like
Yeah,
from economic data to health data to climate data, all this stuff to weather, right? These are things that farmers depend on. These are things that business people depend on, things that generally the government has been very supportive of. Uh,
right.
but the average American, just citizen and people who pay attention seem to rail against these agencies. How, how do we gain this trust back? Like from your personal point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I asked the same question to Erin when I interviewed her, and she she said like communications, communications, communications. Like, um, I think that a lot of people distrust government bureaucracy because they don't understand it. And Erin really emphasized that so many people benefit from CDC programs, um, and the way that government public health has touched everybody's lives, but they're not always aware of it. Um, and yeah, her point of view was that communications had not been centered, um, and that yeah, it doesn't matter. She said like something along the lines of it doesn't matter how good the science you're doing is if you can't talk about it and you can't explain why it's good and what value you can't demonstrate the value. Um, yeah, so I think kind of meeting people where they're at is also something that I've talked to about with a lot of the people that I've interviewed. Like speaking to them on their level, um, kind of bringing stuff to social media has also been a big topic of discussion, which is hard because social media isn't the best grounds for rational conversation, as we know. But just doing your best to try to understand where people are coming from because a lot of people feel have this distrust too because they feel let down by the system and like they've been locked out of kind of this academic um, field, which is true in a lot of cases. So kind of understanding that, understanding the frustration and still reaching out and trying to connect with people, I think is a big one too, especially in the social media age where like rage bait and like, hey, you're wrong gets you farthest, but that doesn't help you connect with people. It's those longer conversations. It's like sitting down with people. If you're using social media, like Aaron was saying, that you should be using it to point to like a podcast episode or a video or something where it's longer and it feels more personal.
Well, speaking of that, what articles should we read from you at newsjunkie.net that will help us understand this issue further?
Yeah, so that interview with Aaron is public on News Junkie. I also have an interview with Gretchen Gerke at the Environmental Data and Governments Initiative. So she's former EPA and has been working with trying to preserve government data for a long time, since 2016, I believe. So she kind of saw all of this coming. So that interview is interesting to look back at now. I also have written a piece about COVID.gov as an example of a government website that used to have actionable information and resources on it that has been interrupted and messed with. So that's a good case study. Yeah, and there's going to be more coming.
I'm wondering if you think that this can actually maybe have long term, short term, it's going to be painful for sure. Do you have any hope that maybe agencies that collect this data, do this research, can maybe be reborn in a way that's less susceptible to political whims and political influence in the future? Like maybe something like a private government kind of partnership. Yeah, I don't know. Where does your hope lie in all of this?
Personally, I would want to see a kind of nonprofit alliance between all of these new organizations that are building up into something bigger and grander, but still independent and I hope still nonprofit, um, that can kind of replace, or at least at the beginning stages, keep science and research and academia moving forward, where the administration would like it to stop because it's easier to control a uneducated public.
Do you think there's a way to fund such, a lot of these ongoing research projects are sometimes decades long,
Yeah.
generations long.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, do you see any way that any possible ways to fund such intergenerational or long research projects that's not going to be dependent on necessarily tax dollars that can be the whim of Congress or ultra powerful presidents?
Right. I mean, that's the big question. My hope is that by bringing all these organizations together, the fundraising will also be brought together. Yeah, I think probably some kind of corporate philanthropy will be really valuable in the beginning stages, foundations, um, all that good stuff. Yeah, as for like sustaining it, I'm not sure. But yeah, no, these really long, decades long studies, and especially studies that like stretch across the entire US, is going to be the hardest part to replace independently. But it's also some of the most valuable work that government has done. So yeah, that is also my hope with like uniting all of these organizations is that we can build back up those connections from coast to coast, by connecting local organizations.
Okay, so it seems like this data is really good for everyone to have, and it's a little confusing. And I don't want to try to parse the Trump administration, their motives,
Mhm.
but who are the people that seem to be benefiting from this obscurification of this data, this um, purging of government data? Are there people that are benefiting from this?
Yeah, I mean, so the purpose of a lot of this government data is to protect people, to protect our health, to protect our safety. So the people who benefit from its erasure is everybody who profits off of suffering and destruction. So that's stuff like the tobacco industry, which will benefit from the Office on Smoking and Health at the CDC being gone as of right now. And oil companies, gas companies benefiting off people not being able to track climate destruction, climate change effects, environmental destruction. Yeah, anybody who has an interest in being able to sell you solutions to problems that they've created is going to be thrilled about this.
Well, on that note, then, Morgan Kriesel, thank you so much for joining me today on Who's Behind the News.
Yeah, thank you.